At Quaker, we know that when you make real food like
Welcome back to the stream. I hope you're having a good day today. I'm doing pretty alright myself, just coming off the back of an illness unfortunately, but mostly recovered. Still got a bit of a stuffy nose, but nothing too terrible. But enjoying the last few days looking over all of the cool new demos from Steam Next Fest. Some very interesting stuff to check out there. Didn't play too many myself, mostly just watched other people check them out and share their thoughts. But did try a few of them, and yeah, there's some good stuff. It's been a while since I've been looking forward to a number of different games. Yeah, there's always something interesting on the horizon, but as it stands, there seems to be quite a few games coming out soon, or at least over the next year or so, that I'm interested in trying out. I did see Steam release a list of the most played demos of Next Fest. That was quite interesting. There's a game on there, The King is Watching. I remember seeing that a while ago. A YouTuber I watched, Splattercat, played that on his channel. Seems like a fairly interesting one. Might check it out, I'm not sure. I saw there's a demo for Monster Train 2. I quite liked Monster Train 1. Roguelike deck builders are such a wide genre. There's so many different things people do within the confines of that description, but it's hard for me to say whether I really like the genre or not. You know, I played Slay the Spire and I found it okay. It wasn't really my favorite. Monster Train, similarly okay, not my favorite, but I think I liked that one a good deal more. I couldn't really tell you why though, I just kind of did. What else is on this list? Railgods of Hystera, not one I looked at myself, but one that I just seeing the trailer for was kind of interested in, with this like train platform base building that seems to have become an entire genre in its own, and I can't even tell where it started from. Like, I saw that one game with this train like on a rail track that was flying in the void that a bunch of people played, and I don't know if that one was the origin, but afterwards suddenly mobile base defense became a genre out of nowhere. Just kind of popped into existence suddenly, and I don't know whether that was the game that started it or not, but it came very unexpectedly. But I suppose that is the way, you know, new genres like that pop up just out of nowhere, like Vampire Survivors just one day appeared and suddenly we have a million games using that formula, which I would have expected to happen earlier considering the success of bullet hell games, but bullet heaven as a genre just didn't seem to have taken off until Vampire Survivors kind of pioneered it. I saw a demo for a game called Death Howl that I'm really excited to try out when it comes out. It's, I think, made by someone who's made another game but I like, but I couldn't tell you what. Or maybe it's just a publisher, I'm not sure. It looks very cool though, I absolutely love the aesthetic. Despite being a writer primarily, I find that so much of my inspiration for creative stuff comes from art and from visuals. So good art styles in a video game do a lot for me. Similarly, there was a game I saw on the Geek Enders podcast called Am I Nima, I think, that I'm also thinking of trying out when it releases. Not at all my usual sort of game. Like the kind of thing that I normally would have looked at and gone, oh, that's a neat concept, and then moved on from it. But the visuals, it looks so good, but I really want to try it out when it comes out. Okay, I'm gonna have to be a little careful here. We'll see how long my voice holds out. This might be a shorter stream, but I'll try to go for at least an hour, I think. My plan for today is to brainstorm ideas for Dungeon Core novels. Probably largely lit RPG, because that's just where the genre is biggest, but not necessarily, just in general dungeon core. It's one of my favorite types of lit RPG. I love reading dungeon core novels. I've read a bunch of them, and I'm looking at a few, not new ones, they've been going for a while, but new to me, that I wanted to get into at the moment. And I thought it would just be a fun little exercise to think about, you know, affinities, themes, archetypes for dungeon cores and what they might be. Now you can see at the top here I've got some other tabs open. We've got a random noun generator to just give ideas for completely random stuff we can throw in. And then when I was considering what dungeon cores really do and what their themes tend to be when you see them in a story, since not all of them do have themes, I found that they really felt a lot like basically divine domains. So I've got some god generators for like D&D and stuff like that open as well that we can look through for ideas if we need them. Now, to think a little bit about dungeon cores beforehand and what theme or affinity for them means really, there are different types we have for that. Probably let's try and split it into like 3. So you've got bound to a single theme, or picks a set number of themes, which I think is probably closest to the divinity archetype for that kind of polytheistic fantasy setting. So these dungeon cores pick their theme in whatever manner it is, or maybe they're created with a specific theme, and then they are hard stuck within that. All of the stuff that they can make, the monsters they summon, the traps they get, are specifically drawn from that theme and they can't go outside of it. Then you've got the can do anything but sticks to a theme voluntarily. So I guess for like some examples, this is the problem sometimes with reading semi-niche fiction with the kind of stuff that I'm into, that I try to think of like, oh, what's popular? And I go, oh yeah, of course this story is like super popular, but then I think, actually no, if you go look at the numbers, not that many people have read this at all, especially because you get way bigger of an audience on Kindle Unlimited than you do on like Royal Road, and I read on Royal Road because I don't like Amazon and I'm not about to pay for their subscription service, especially since they just recently made it way worse for the authors and to an extent for customers as well, so that very much sucks. Because I've got an example for, well, let's get the third category as well. Gets benefits and synergy bonuses for sticking on theme. So that one technically can do whatever, just like the second one, but more than just wanting to, actively gets stronger if it goes with a particular type of creature for long enough. I think an example of this one would be no need for... Oh my God. I'm getting more YouTube adverts than usual today. I need to go find some music that I can download and set up a playlist with, instead of having it off over on YouTube. Yeah, no need for a core. One I covered recently-ish. Recently by my standards in a video of a Royal Road report. Bound to a single theme / picks a set number of themes. What do we have there? Actually, possibly this one should go down here, because I do feel they're not explicitly given bonuses, but the abilities synergize so well together that they do get stronger for sticking to a theme, not so much in terms of the creatures they summon, but just in general. Aren't a single theme picks a 7. Okay, so I can't do anything. Let's just take this part out, and I'll put blue core here. Or, I'm only a few chapters in, so I don't know that much about it yet, but Dungeon Without a System, that's one I started recently. There's another I just started reading called The Cabin is Always Hungry, which I'm not even sure which that will go in. I think The Cabin Always Hungry does, like, he has to pick his monster archetype earlier in the beginning, and then can only summon from that archetype, but I don't know whether he's really constrained by that, or if he rapidly gets new archetypes or whatever. I'm too early into the novel. Let's actually just remove the examples for now, because they're not too important to the thought exercise we're going to be doing today. I think I will just get started on typing out some ideas. I've got my own ideas for a potential Dungeon Core novel, and I already know what theme I'd want to go for in that, so I won't include that one on today's list. I'm just going to brainstorm a few that I can maybe use later on as other dungeons to encounter or places to hear about, points of comparison. So the one that sticks in my mind a lot is dragons. I feel like I've read a number of both Dragon Transformation and Dragon Dungeon lit RPGs. So obviously, something like this is going to be a fairly, like, classic D&D dungeon. Yeah. Stone corridors, caves, chests of gold, probably kobolds. Apparently kobolds have some really convoluted lore. They used to be like dog creatures and then became lizard creatures, or the other way around because of some translation errors somewhere. I'm not sure if they were always linked to dragons or not, but in the present day, kobolds are little lizard guys that really love dragons, so definitely you'd see them. Various lizard creatures, usually fire themed as well. Because fire dragons are just a classic. I know other types have become more popular with D&D's popularity, and they're both chromatic and metallic dragon having a different element each depending on the color. But generally speaking, dragons are fire themed. That's just the way it goes. Then what else? It's going to be a lot of creature themed. Because of the appeal of a dungeon, or the core focus of a dungeon generally being traps and monsters, the themes for them tend to be what type of monster are they spawning. I know that I've seen lots of ideas from people on various like subreddits and stuff talking about, oh, here's this and this thing you could do with a dungeon core, and here's this and this theme you could have. But those, like, you tend to see those on when you've got threads asking, like, oh, if you were thrown into an isekai lit RPG and became a dungeon core, what theme would you pick? And people pick very esoteric things. But the actual stories themselves tend to be, here's the theme of the monsters. Another classic one, I think, is Undead. Big on Monster Evolution. You know, progress from, you know, like zombie to skeleton to skeleton archer to skeleton mage, etc, etc. And also very big on resurrecting fallen enemies, kind of thing dungeons do. Snakes is a very broad one, and you get like Naga and Gorgons. General snake creatures, and because certain ones like Medusa have such strong such a strong mythos, turning to stone is associated with snakes. I'm pretty sure I've seen or read more than a few things where snakes have some kind of hypnotic eye ability, or are just generally able to paralyze people, either with their gaze or with their bite. Stuff like that. Yeah, different monster themes. What else? Or what's a non-monster one? Like a divine domain. Forge is a very, very common domain, so metal constructs, animated weapons, very trap heavy, plants, lots of poisons, spore clouds, hypnotic effects, also trap heavy. Yeah, plants, where did that association come from? I know that there are like carnivorous plants in real life, and you know, some of them have like whatever nectar stuff, sweet things that are also sticky on them to lure bugs in and then eat them. But how did we jump from that to the very common like, oh, here's a creature and it puffs out a cloud of spores at you? Nothing in nature, as far as I know, there might be some weird plant out there, but I don't know of any plant that puffs out big visible clouds of spores. Maybe in the spring and the summer you get huge fields of flowers to the point where the pollen becomes visible, but not generally. If anything, there might be certain types of mushroom that if you tap on the cap a little bit, spores will shake out, but not plants, and mushrooms aren't plants. You will probably still see mushrooms in a plant-themed dungeon, but they're rarely ever the focus. It's usually traps with like either fruit that's bait, or with hypnotic or paralyzing poisonous pollen and spores, or you see various vines that can actively move and wrap around and capture creatures. Let's have a look at one of these. We've got smithing, storms, engines up. We've got double up as a history, night. Night might be interesting, moon might be interesting. Alchemy, I mean, I'm obviously going to be interested in alchemy, that's my whole thing, but we'll leave it for a moment. Winter, loss, courage, fires, the stars, magic, fire, sea. The underwater level dungeon. No one goes because it's massive pain. There's one thing people don't like in a game, it's an underwater section. That might be a fun theme for a dungeon though. How would you go about it? I mean, in terms of creatures, it's fairly broad, right? Like underwater biodiversity is huge, and all gets lumped together usually, right? Like if you're above ground and you're making a themed dungeon, you have your theme be as narrow as a specific species, right? Like your dungeon could be cat themed, and it will have cats. It will probably also have like big cats and stuff. Or let's go instead for dogs, because that's a bit broader. Like cats, you quickly go into like lions and all that kind of stuff. But dogs, you've the various domestic dog breeds, and then like wolves. There's others out there as well. I'm sure someone American might be able to name a bunch more. I'm pretty sure they've got stuff over there. I think coyotes might be a type of dog, maybe? Not certain. But yeah, if you pick like the theme of dogs, that's a pretty narrow theme. And I've just lost face tracking. Hooray. That's a pretty narrow theme, but it would be perfectly reasonable if picked. Like no one would bat an eyelid at the dog-themed dungeon. Or something a bit broader, like birds you could do. There's a whole animal kingdom there, basically. But then underwater, it's just like, yes, your theme is underwater. And you can do whatever within that space. It's not like you're the crab-themed dungeon and you do only crabs, that people would say, oh, that's only crabs, it's so limiting. And I think that's an issue of familiarity. We see the stuff that's above the water, we see all the variety of it right there in front of your faces. Like, I don't know anything really about bird species, but if I go out on a walk, I'm going to see, a dozen different types of birds. So I've got an idea that there's a lot of variety there. Underwater, if you want to tell me your dungeon is eel-themed, I don't know what I can do with that. I know there's electric eels, and there's, what's it called, the moray? It's like that very big one with the really snappy jaws. And that's where my eel knowledge ends. I couldn't really give you any more than that. I think that's why underwater as a category is allowed to be so broad, because in most people's eyes it isn't actually broad, because they only know so many underwater creatures off the top of their head, whereas in a different category you'll say some animal and they're like, oh yeah, here's 12 different variations of this thing. Let's see what else. Trickery, I mean, trickery goes naturally for a dungeon, right? Trickery, traps, mimics, changelings, anything deceptive really. Hidden rooms, puzzles? Do puzzles really fall under trickery? Because it's not a trick, is it? Like, unless the puzzle doesn't actually do what you expect it to, like it doesn't open the door that you think it will, puzzles isn't really in the trickery theme. But I think trickery as a concept, when related to dungeon cores, is going to have most people thinking of like a playful trickster, right? Like sort of whimsical creatures, fairies or whatever, that kind of stuff, who like to play games, so puzzles would definitely fit in with that. Let's see what else. Healing. I mean, healing is an easy one to twist around, right? You think of healing as like a positive, or what does healing mean as a negative? How could healing be an enemy to you? All the dungeon monsters are really hard to kill. That's the long and short of it. Let's take it. I really need to get like a warm drink for when I've got a sore throat. It's much more soothing. Yeah, healing dungeon monsters are hard to kill. That's so straightforward. You could go like the horrible, the kind of horrible curse route of having things overgrow unwillingly, that kind of stuff. Healing as a curse isn't a new concept either, though it has become more prevalent recently. It's a bit heavy on the body horror. I love that kind of stuff. in my own media. I don't know if it's something that I want to throw onto stream without explicit prior warning. Forest might be interesting. So, woodland creatures, large areas / levels, survival aspects, where more of the danger of the dungeon is in just sustaining yourself while you're exploring it. You know, the environment, not even actively trapped, but just hostile in its own nature. Probably Fae again here. Those fit into that kind of aesthetic pretty well. And that's one of the big questions you kind of need to ask yourself when you're looking at something like this and planning out, you know, what falls under this affinity theme, what are the names for it? I had more before I started, right? Affinity, theme, oh, there's another word like on the tip of my tongue and I can't quite think of it. What's some synonyms for theme? Subject, matter, issue, question, idea. No, not quite what I'm looking for. Oh well, we'll leave it there for now. But yeah, this is the kind of thing that you're really thinking about and trying to decide when you're coming up with something like this, be it for divine domains or dungeon core themes or anything else where you've got like, you know, your categories of magic for a conceptual magic system, right? Where instead of you go kind of beyond the elemental fire, water, earth, and you go beyond the conceptual schools of like you know, what is it, destruction in Elder Scrolls is one of the schools, or evocation in Dungeons and Dragons, illusion, stuff like that, and you go into like order magic, darkness magic, let's focus on here, order, darkness, that kind of stuff. And then you've got to decide, okay, how broad are these? How narrow are they? A forest is a location, an area. So is the theme of a forest anything that could potentially be living inside of a forest? Because that's a lot. And forests cover you know, a whole range of climates, right? Like when I say forest, my default vision that I picture is a fairly temperate European forest. I don't really picture them in the winter. I would picture one in the summer, right? Like it's dark and spooky at night, welcoming in the day. There's, I don't know, deer about the place, wolves, foxes, birds, squirrels, that kind of stuff. Someone else hears the word for us and they're picturing some, you know, colossal, huge treed American forest. Someone else might picture some Arctic, snow-covered landscape. So which of these is covered by your forest domain? Is it all of them? If it is, do you get, you know, ice powers to go along with the winter season? Do you get healing and growth from the spring and summer? What falls in on the forest domain? And it's a little harder with something like this, because unlike the underwater level where I said, you know, this can be broad just because people will only think of so many examples of what fits into each subcategory of a water level, forest is broad and people will recognize all the stuff in it, but also people won't immediately go like, okay, so what actually is the essence of a forest? It's a much harder question to answer. What aspects are core to the woods? Or would woods be a different domain, right? Like what's the example that's always given in terms of the impact that word choice can have on presentation and perception? You've got a nice cozy cottage in the forest versus the haunted murder cabin in the woods, right? There's two ways of saying the exact same thing but having very different meaning for it. How much that plays into it will probably be up to the individual author. They'll have to decide for themselves what they're using their words to mean. Like, for example, if you have a theme of if you have a celestial theme, what does that mean? Right, like different interpretations. Angels? More broad? Divine / holy beings? Stars and the sky? Right? Like, you know, celestial theme, because if I were doing it, I would have a celestial... Oh, sorry, just hit my microphone. I'm gesturing a whole bunch, you can't see that. I would have a celestial theme be all about the sky. Like, if you told me you've got a celestial attuned dungeon, let's put that one up here actually, attunement. If you told me you've got a celestial attunement dungeon, I would imagine it to have a bunch of sky and space related powers. I would expect like gravity fields. I would write that to have light and dark related powers from the stars in the night sky. I'd have like moon stuff. I might have a bit of far-seeing and clairvoyance from astrology and stuff like that. Right, like I might not personally be a fan of astrology in the real world, but I think it's a cool world building tool, a cool potential magic system. That would be my interpretation of celestial. But obviously a lot of people are going to hear celestial and think, oh yes, like divine, heavenly, angelic, that kind of stuff. So which do you go with? It's up to the author, ultimately. But a very important thing to consider. Take a drink. I think the reason it's important is because you always want to be pretty careful about setting and meeting expectations when you're writing a story. So if you drop in a word or for a certain theme and it ends up being completely different to what most people assume when they hear that word, you probably ought to make it clear very early on what you're going with. You're on the reverse of the celestial. If you have a... If you're using celestial to mean good and divine and holy, instead of relating to the sky, then you might also have an infernal attunement, and how you've presented one will affect the other. If you don't want it to, if you want infernal to be demons from hell, but celestial to be things from the sky, then you need to make sure that people are aware of the divine attunement, so that they don't go in with false expectations of what the other one is, right? If you go the other way around, then that might be easier. If you have a celestial attunement that's all sky and then you introduce infernal later, people might go, oh, that's a bit odd, why isn't the celestial heavenly? And then you can just... It's probably still best in that case to drop in a little note on the divine attunement existing, just for that extra bit of clarity. Alright, let's have a look at our random noun generator for some stuff that's a bit more out there. I mean, internet? A modern day dungeon? How would I do that? Internet. There are a few different things, I guess. You could have one that's all stuff from online made physical. I'm using question marks to denote that there's different options. So yeah, the internet stuff from online made physical, or the dungeon is structured like a network. You know, like different rooms are different web pages or servers or stuff like that. All about connection and communication. Actually, transmission of information, which could present itself how exactly? The themes of connection, communication, or transmission of information as an affinity for a dungeon. Maybe like traps that edit data and stuff like that. Maybe mental attacks representative of like hacking and stuff like that. That's more general computer themed, but there isn't going to be much stuff that fits under an internet theme that doesn't also fit under a general computer theme. But safety, meaning, statement. Strategy, maybe? Mood. Teaching. Revolution. Revolution. The dungeon holds different factions that fight against each other. Who's in control and who's opposing them affect the state of the dungeon. That could be an interesting concept. An ever-shifting dungeon with different factions vying for control. I suppose it's worth mentioning, obviously I'm looking at dungeon core here, and not a more general fantasy dungeon delves, because that's... Honestly, I should make a note on that, that I should make a whole video sometime about dungeon ecology, because if you don't have a, thinking, not necessarily human intelligence, but if you don't have some kind of overriding will managing the dungeon, obviously its internals are going to play out very differently. You'll need more natural explanations on why certain things are the way they are. And that will definitely include different factions of who's in control of the dungeon, how do they get in control, how are they keeping control. Video on dungeon ecology. Also reminds me that I need to finish watching Dungeon Meshi at some point. I got to like the end of season 1, I think. I need to go back to that. Arknights is having a collab event with that anime very soon, which will be very cool, so I should catch up so I know as much as possible about it. What else? I feel like we're getting a lot of repeat words here. I don't think their list of nouns is particularly long, unfortunately. Video software, no. Kings, personality, dirt, that would just be earth themed. Library, yeah, library is sort of location based one. Obviously looks like a labyrinthine library. Cursed books. Magical librarians. Probably like cultists slash hostile knowledge seekers. Stuff like that. I mean, the B dungeon is already an existing book and it's good. Distribution, warning, army. Military themed dungeon could certainly work. Yeah, in the same vein as like a library one, you could have a castle and have, you know, knights and all of that. I'm not going to write a lot of that one because it's not a theme that I find very interesting. But a castle with knights and stuff is definitely an option. What else? We've got luck, plague. Plague could be an interesting one. Law. Oh, there are rules to follow that make getting through. There are rules to follow that give. There are rules that give benefits if followed and penalties if not, but the rules themselves may be inconvenient. That one, which of these is appropriate for a particular dungeon core setting is going to depend a lot on what the dungeon core is there for, like why it exists, where it gets its power from, stuff like that. So for example, if your dungeon core is just a place that a person with a lot of magical power builds, then a theme like undead makes a ton of sense. If you've got a lich, for example, like the D&D classic, the Tomb of Annihilation, I'm pretty sure there's a lich somewhere at the middle of that. So a big old dungeon full of undead and magical creatures and stuff that the lich has managed to bind over time, it makes a ton of sense as a theme for the dungeon. Whereas, like, imposing laws on reality that, if followed, give benefits, and if disobeyed, give penalties, and it just kind of works in an area of effect, either your mage is extremely powerful, or this dungeon is kind of tied into the inner workings of reality to begin with, and that's why it's able to cause these effects. And I think that probably works the easiest in a... Okay, that's interesting. Now even when I reset my tracking, it's not quite centering properly anymore. Give me a second here. That works a lot easier in a lit RPG where you kind of don't have to explain anything about why something is working. It's just like, okay, here's the dungeon, let's get a system prompt to pick an affinity. What does it pick? It picks law. Okay, here's how the law affinity works within these bounds. How is the dungeon able to do this? Well, it's not. That would be absurd. The system handles it for it. That's a little more reasonable. Death. It's kind of redundant. We're trying to kill anyway, and instant death abilities aren't fun usually. Love, war, fire, luck, war, knowledge. Not a terribly huge list here either. Nightmares might be an interesting one. We'll stick that on the list here. Nightmares. The letter there. There we go. Travel. Kind of antithetical to a dungeon. Because it could work if you make a really, really huge one. Dimensional stretching, expansion inside a dungeon is not unusual in most settings. Disasters. Protection, destruction, the sun, vengeance. Get some more from over here. Metalworking, battle, villainy, war, civilization. Civilization could be interesting. Will probably play out similar to the Revolution one in terms of having different factions within the dungeon. Something like that. Creativity. Earth, woodlands, spring. No. Alchemists, water, rain, autumn. Maybe some more creature archetypes, whatever types of monster do we have that we could make a dungeon themed around. Goblins and similar stuff, they get lumped together with like, I mean hobgoblins obviously, but also orcs, trolls, that kind of stuff all get kind of lumped together usually. Could do one with unusual creatures, of course, you know, things that aren't usually thought of as creatures, like a humanoid themed one that's all the enemies are humans, elves, dwarves, the classic fantasy races just turned into monsters in here. Possibly. Not terribly. That kind of on the nose reversal is not usually terribly interesting to me, at least, right? Like I enjoy a good deconstruction, but I think you need more than that for it to be a good deconstruction. You can't just go, we'll take this situation and flip it 180. What are you saying about it in that case, right? A good deconstruction has to actually address why things are like that, what it means for them to be like that, what it means to switch them around, that kind of thing, which I don't think a 180 flip really accomplishes. If I just Google creature archetypes and spell it correctly, I come up with MTG. Okay, sure, fair enough. Let's have a look at our Reddit thread. Angels, beasts, constructs, curse, dragons, demi-humans, elementals. Elementals could be an interesting dungeon. Fiends, you're splitting. Fiends you usually see if you are defining them differently as like demons or whatever. Giants, monsters, humanoids, plants, slimes. Slime dungeons, I mean, how many slime lit RPGs are there at this point? The lit RPG classic, right? There's dozens of different reincarnated as a slime lit RPG novels, there's manga, there's animes, it's everywhere. Because the lit RPG genre obviously comes from the role-playing games, and the Japanese role-playing games are a lot of the very biggest ones in this particular, in the skills and abilities kind of style, right? Like, role-playing game is a very, very broad definition, and lots of Western games like are kind of, I think, action RPGs, some people categorize them off, like Dark Souls and stuff like that, where you've got skills that you level up technically, but they're not at all the same as in a Japanese RPG, where you've got very explicit, like, here's your character and these are the skills they learn, and this skill does this much damage and stuff like that, that lit RPG really leans into. And the basic enemy, the core first creature you run into in any of those is going to be the goblin or the slime. So there's a lot of reborn as a goblin or slime one, and because goblins generally aren't very cute, there's a lot more slime ones than goblin ones. This one's almost too easy to go for it all. Anyone got some interesting ideas in here? Chimeras? Yeah, maybe. Gestalt Intelligence, Group Minds. That is an actually very interesting idea. Any anger things? Yeah, retrocausal beings. Ooh, that's a, you want to be careful about that kind of thing. Sonic swarms, toppers, okay. Parasites leans extremely rapidly into horror. And again, I like horror, but if I'm going to be discussing that kind of stuff in great detail, I'll want to tag the stream appropriately beforehand, so we'll just skim past it for the time being. Dinosaur themed, yeah, interesting. Puppies, shape changes, undead is a classic, yeah. MTG creature archetypes. What does D&D split them into? You've got like humanoid, aberration. I think dragons is just one on their own, right? Not sure. Let's see if I can come up with an interesting one myself. It's off the top of my head. What's a type of creature? Or what, maybe it's the wrong way of looking at it. What are some interesting fantasy creatures that would be cool to have together in a dungeon, and what single word can I use to categorize them all together that makes it interesting? So, you're a dungeon crawl, you're summoning minions to defend yourself, and you want some kind of large defender, but then I'm thinking of like metal constructs, and that's already pretty much covered, right? There's, you know, constructs or the forge or something like that. We'll cover that. Pardon me. I'm gonna take a sip of my drink. What else can we go with? I like building water features into stuff when I'm kind of designing like buildings or cities or whatever for world building. So a partially underwater dungeon, amphibious creatures. Yeah, amphibians would be a category, but I don't really want, you know, frogs and stuff. That's not what I'm going for. So what else? A dryad slash what are they called? Nereid is like the underwater version of a dryad. Dryad, Nereid, nature spirit dungeon, where everything you come across is accompanied by a suitable spirit inhabiting it. Every random rock, every plant, every pond, every feature in the entire dungeon has a little spirit living inside of it that's there to make your life just a little bit more difficult as a dungeon delver. It could work. In theory, it could work. Well, there's obviously a lot more you could come up with, and a lot more detail you could go into on these examples. However, my throat is in fact still sore from being ill. We have hit the 1 hour mark. I know that includes like 10 minutes of starting soon screen, but I'd rather not strain my voice and then just try to stream a couple more times this week instead of forcing myself to do a long one now, so I think I will in fact call things early here. So thank you very much for joining me here today. I do hope that you have enjoyed the stream, and I shall see you again next time.